Okay. Good. So this is a tutorial on how do we do this protagonist drawing. And obviously you could go any way you want, but I'm looking for something different. And I think we need to combine vector-based drawing with rendering techniques that potentially have been post-produced in Photoshop. Okay, so I'm going to be opening Photoshop while I work on this thing. So I'm going to say Photoshop. Okay, so to get a section perspective, well, we need a clipping plane. So I'm going to go probably to the right view. I'm going to do the clipping plane, and I'm going to click a plane here by clicking 2 times. That what it does is cuts the building, whatever the plane is, and basically you're allowed to see one half and not the other one. So if you see, that's the plane, and this is the plane, and that's the plane. Notice that it is only cutting on the right view, but if you go to the perspective and you click on the properties and select the clipping plane, you can tell it where you would like it to cut. So you can say I want it to cut on the perspective, but you could say potentially I want it to put it on the top view. There you go, or in the front view as well. Okay. As you move the clipping plane, you can move from anywhere you want. You basically are cutting the building at a so one first thing I will select or create is where you want the clipping plane. By the way, you can add another clipping plane by copying this one or creating a different one. I'm going to do it on the front view clipping plane. There you go. I'm going to select that plane and also perspective. So you could potentially have a double clipping plane, double section perspective or something like that. That could be an interesting model as well. Even you could do 2 or 3 or as many. You could just add and create some kind of an interesting, impossible, difficult series of cuts. No? Anyway, so that works out. Here's a good time to say about how we will actually go about a scale section. You will basically select in your right view the clipping plane that is cutting the building and the building, and then you will do your make 2D. You know, when it's so complex and so many things, you always choose the view that you want. In this case, is the right view, and I recommend maintain source layers. And probably for very complex models, the hidden lines are not necessary. Okay, you do want clipping plane intersections because that's basically the section. So if you do this make 2D, you have your section. You just need to make sure you have a dimension that you can control in order to scale it properly and have a scale drawing. That could happen with this view, but obviously you can create another clipping plane on the perspective. That you can move up. Here I could select this other clipping plane, say I only want the top. Well, I don't want any of them here for now. And for example, I want this big clipping plane only in the top view. Okay, so that gives you your plan here. You can select again the plan, maybe deselect the other clipping planes, and then make to the view, no hidden lines, clipping plane intersections. Yes. Okay, so you have that. You make it 2D. You have your drawing. And again, if you want to combine it with a rendering, which is what makes sense, you would just make sure that it's the same view, and then you will go to your render settings, change the settings to high quality and so on. I think we talked about this in the past, and you can do that combination of rendering for the plan and the plan itself with projection elements. The same could be for the right view. Again, make 2D with a clipping plane working on the section, and then combine it with the rendering Illustrator. No? But in our case, what I'm going to do is basically perspective rendering. So I'm going to choose that clipping plane. I'm just deleting the other ones. I could actually hide them or whatever. And I'm going to place it in a place that I think it's important. I don't know. Maybe it's a space where the project is playing better, but also maybe it's an issue of how can we tell the story of the interior space as best as possible. And the question is, how do we allocate this in the perfect spot? No? So you have the control right click that allows you to zoom in and out a little bit smoother, because when you scroll in and out, it's a little bit jumpy. So you can, again, control right click to move out and so on. You can also shift right click to pan until you find your moment. I recommend probably that the horizon is set to the person. So that gives you a little bit of also scale value. And then you might want to arbitrate this in a particular way, depending on your project, logic or spatial definition. Okay, so I'm going to say that's the one. So once you have come up with the ideal perspective, you need to save this view. You need to go to set view, name views, and then here, when this pops out, you're going to say save, and you call it something like final perspective. So again, this allows us to be able to fool around, move around, do whatever we're doing, but always have the option of returning to that exact view by going to set view, final perspective. There you go. Why is this good? Because this allows us to return as many times as we want, to render, to create the make 2D, whatever it is. So, okay. So I'm going to actually select the whole thing. Did Control A because I know that everything has to be selected. Make sure you select the clipping plane as well. And then, as you know, oops, make 2D. Something happened here. Let's go back to the view. Select everything, make 2D. And then again, view, we don't want hidden lines because it will be way too complex. And we do want the clipping plane intersections. That's important, so we get the cuts. Maintain source layers. You can click viewport rectangle if you want. It will give you this rectangle of the viewport. So you can say, okay. It's going to take a while because it's quite complex. It's important that before we do that, every single element in your project is set to a particular scale, etc. And set to a particular layer. So when you get the make 2D, you also have the layers to work with. Okay, we go to the top view. I was control tabbing. I'm going to move this away. It tends to go always to the 0, 0. That's why I move it away. And that's our drawing. Okay, it brings the viewport. Now we can do export selected, as you have done 1,000 times, Illustrator. And what I'm going to do is take this to desktop. I'm going to call this final vector drawing. Okay, we're going to say current view. If you preserve the model scale, that's actually, this option is good for scale drawings if you want them to be properly scaled. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to open Illustrator. Meanwhile, what I'm going to do is, I don't really need this because I have the DWG, sorry, the Illustrator now. So, but I want to go to the same view. So I'm going to go again back to set view, final perspective, and I want to get a rendering out of this. So that's when we can right click on the blue sphere. And, you know, for this option, we can do a bit more kind of a diagrammatic type of rendering. But if you already want to try to do a V-Ray rendering, you can go to the tutorials that are uploaded to Canvas. Okay, so here what we basically need, it's a simple, I'm going to do a simple one because I don't have much time, but you want to pop up the dimensions and the DPI. You want to take the DPI to 150, and then this one, when you want the final to 1000 or 1600, this option could be good. Okay, you in your final, you might want to do final quality. This is set, I want to set to render because I don't want the V-Ray right now in this particular case. Okay, current viewport, that's where we're actually doing. Solid color, if you want an environment, you can click this. They will give you a little bit of more light. Use new environment, let's see if I goes, basic environment. You can give some environment to give a bit of light quality. You want a transparent background because you can work afterwards with the city element. You don't want ground plane, although it could be good. You can also take a look at the render option, see how that ground looks. You see how this is ground. Also, actually, we don't really need that because this is on water. So I'm gonna uncheck the ground options. You have also custom reflections environment. That's fine as long as it gives us a transparent background as a PNG. That's what we need. You can turn on the sun, so it comes in a particular angle. The sun, you can do the sun settings here and do it either manual control, which is set this. If you want manual, you can start changing the settings here, and notice how the sun comes in a particular direction depending on the setting. That's going to be changing azimuth and altitude options. Once you like it, you can say okay. You can render curves and so on if you want it a bit more diagrammatic in that sense. So you can test some of these options to see the wireframe. And I think that should kind of do something simple and nice. Again, I would probably recommend, mine is not going to look amazing because of the settings here resolution. So you want to take that a little bit higher, 16-1200, 150, and then good quality here. So you're going to click on the render option. Again, you have to be in the same exact view when you render. Okay, meanwhile, while this is rendering, well, notice how actually has a problem with the size. So that's actually the constraint, the dimensions here, the 4:3. So when you might need to change that instead of 4:3 to make it actually a bit more elongated, depending on where your view is. Just make sure before you go through the process of rendering that you rendering actually plays fully here. Okay. In my case, it's not, but again, the example. Just going to go through the process so you understand how the process, the line of thought works. Okay, so if we go to Illustrator, here is the place we're going to combine both the vector base and the render. So we're going to do open. We're going to click on the final vector drawing. That's going to give you that particular thing. I mean, the drawing that we have created, it is important that you actually create a new file and make sure that the paper size is the one you want, and think about how big your panel is. So you're going to print and you're going to say, well, I kind of know that this particular inches it's maybe 8.5 by 11, or tabloid and so on. It has to be, again, a big piece. So just think of your overall panel and how big is it going to be within the panel. Okay, I'm going to do it tabloid. That's a new file. Here I'm going to select Control C. I'm going to bring it here. Control V. Remember that before you do Control V, hopefully you have the page remember layers, and you're going to select the whole thing and scale it. Okay. I mean, we're not going to really need this, but I'm going to just leave it there for now. You can always turn it off in the layer management here. Okay, so now we need to either work with the layers. So you remember, you click on the layer and you can change this to whatever color. So imagine you're dealing with something a bit, related to water in your inspirational images, and you might want to start thinking of those being in a particular color. So again, it doesn't necessarily have to be like a very conventional drawing. We're looking for interesting ways of representing your project. So look at the references of your films and your art selections and make those changes. The important one here is also one of the layers being the plane intersection. So that would be the one that it cuts. You want that to be more evident, maybe darker tones and thicker. So I'm going with the logic of the blues. I'm going to make that, I don't know, 1. Or even, let's just make it, maybe it's too much, but 3. Sounds good. You have different caps options. Sometimes the round options are better. Sometimes butt caps or the other ones are, so, or how the corners of the polylines are, depending on what you're interested. So one would be like this round, or you can have them straight, depending on, again, what you're looking for. In your layers, you definitely need the plane intersections to move upwards all the way, because it's the section. So before, notice how this line, which is projection, was on top. You definitely want this to be all the way up. Okay. There you can see nicely the project. You also have obviously the layer of the new stuff that you can accentuate or make it a bit more powerful or unique. By the way, some line drawings are already quite powerful in themselves, so you might not even need to place a render, or the render could become very, very transparent. Again, however you think it's best for the means of your representation. Okay, let's take it back. So this is a very, very low res. I haven't changed any material, so I'm going to save that. It's about to finish. But remember that you have the option in the layer management for each of the elements to incorporate a particular material. For example, maybe the centerpiece could have whatever material you're looking for, like a reflection metal or something super powerful. No? It's about to finish. You might need to kind of give it a little of time for this rendering. Just maybe go out for a walk and then return when you're doing the final perspective. Okay, again, you can assign materials. I'll explain it in a second. Right now, I'll say final render. Okay, interior. So before I go again to Illustrator, just remember that you have the options of changing the renderings, no? So, oops. Okay, so that just has the option here to change the materiality of the circle that we've seen this in other occasions. Here's where you will say file place. You will select the rendering. I really don't know what this is. That's interesting because it wasn't actually in the view. The important thing is to make sure this fits as best as possible. Again, as I mentioned, mine was cutting the perspective. But you know, once you kind of settle in an adequate image here, okay. So again, yours will be, although why not? Sometimes you could combine a rendering and say half of it yes and half of it no. For example, I could actually embed this image so it doesn't depend on links, and I could say, give me this cropping the half of it. Let's say enter. So you could have like a mix of line drawing and image. No, I could also say, well, what if we actually edit this in Photoshop? We take and we open that particular image, and maybe we shouldn't have embedded this. Now that I think, because if we're going to edit it, it will be, you will be able to change it. So let me actually place it again. Use the arrows. There you go. So again, you see the X, that means there is a link. So if I actually change it in Photoshop, let's just do Control L for levels and do something, you know, I don't know, whatever, a bit more, burning the image and intensifying the shadows. If I save Control S this, and I go back to Illustrator, the links here, there you go. They should see, well, update, no? You can double click that option. Update link, and there you go, you have it now. You could also crop this image here. Into the middle. Say enter. So you have it cropped and linked at the same time. I believe it's linked. Maybe by cropping, let me see, if I do some change, like just painting in a color here and save. Let me see if the link, see, so we lose the link when we do the cropping. So it's probably best that we go back. And there you go. So it's actually, you go to the paragraph, say update link. So you will have the green thing. Okay, so we can't crop it until afterwards. Or what we could do also is go to Photoshop, image, and do actually cropping, which is C shortcut, cropping tool, and then we say, well, I want only the half of it for whatever reason. Again, so you can save that and say yes. No, that's a different size. So we'll reset it here and use the arrows or move it directly. Moving with the arrows. Okay. So maybe it's the other side that's more interesting. So that's a little bit of a aggressive. Maybe you want that half and half line drawing and rendering. That's up to you. You can also select the image and add some transparency to that if it's a bit too intense. This one could have people, could have more materiality, and the other one could be more about line drawing, that is more about the morphology and the structure and so on. You could also do any kind of adjustment, do hue, saturation, and you know, color if it needs to. It's a grayscale rendering, so it's not a big deal. But you can do a filter of this and create some blurring conditions if that's something you are interested. You could also do eraser. You can erase, right click and use like a smooth type of eraser and very large scale. And you can say erase, left button here. So what this does, if I save it, and I update the link, select here and update link, gives you that transitional thing that I think it looks quite nice. It's a rendering that transitions into drawing in a very interesting way, you know. So again, you could add people there. You could do it in here if you have persons that they're not vector based. Maybe you want them, or you can place them in Illustrator. You could have actually vector based, very abstract persons here, 1, 2, and then you can have them realistic here with shadows. So as a background, maybe you want to also include in Photoshop particular background. So if I actually search for a background, it would be ideal to go to your map somehow and find as much of a realistic type of image. So I'm going to go here to satellite view and go with the shift left button. Maybe if you don't get a nice render, you could always go back and search for photos. Oftentimes, you know, people upload photos here of different views. You can click the little guy and drop it until you see, you know, this one there. I'm not sure if that will be. And that one could be. Yeah. And go and see the view. It's a little far away, but I think it could be helpful. I'm going to do a print screen, snipping tool. And you're trying to give it an idea. You should be closer to that, but it could be helpful. Let's save that. I'll call it city. Back. Go back to my Photoshop, and then I'm going to say open, Control O. City in the back. There it is. I'm going to say, I mean, you don't need everything, but you know, M for you know, rectangular marquee. You know, you want to take something that could look nice. It's not going to be high resolution, but that's not a big deal. Control C. I'm going to bring it here as Control V. Obviously, that needs to go as a layer underneath because it's actually a PNG. All the transparencies. It's working towards our advantage. So we could actually have, you know, the city behind. I'm going to do Control T for the layer that I placed and scale this. You have to choose, you want a little bit of the bridge, you want a little more of the city. Again, it doesn't have to be accurate, but it does relate to somehow what we have in mind. And do that. We need to also erase the same way we did with the other one, this one. So I'm going to do E as in eraser. And then erase here as well. That's passing again with the right click, like a big size and a smooth option here. So when both of them are on, you know, both the city, so on, you could also potentially work with the background as much as you need. You could do some erasing of the sky. You could erase in a particular level of opacity, so just a bit, but not too much. The water here could be erased a bit as well, so it's a bit more transitional. You could change maybe the color tone of the background by saying image hue saturation. Maybe the blues are good, maybe not so good, whatever. So maybe you want a particular color that, again, is linked to maybe more light or less light. Maybe you want to add also contrast a little bit to that background. So you have more intense. You could afterwards give a little transparency if you want. Depends on how that looks. Okay. Maybe you want to emphasize the city, but maybe not. Maybe it's the city that you don't want to emphasize, but it's still there as a background thing. So all these, you know, possibilities are given. Also, I noticed that there's all this dirtiness that somehow came, so I can also erase those by going to the layer and just erase them a little bit so they're not bothering. Yeah, you can again add people and so on, work in Photoshop independently, save this at the end. If you save this, by the way, it's a Photoshop, you might want to save a Photoshop file so you can work with the layers in the future, but then you can do Ctrl+Shift+S to save as, okay, so here you need to, once you're done with the process, you can actually flatten here the image. I would recommend saving as well, so you have the Photoshop to work with. If you flatten, what it does is a background and a locked layer that you can't work anymore with. So keep in mind to always keep the Photoshop file there to work with. Okay, so I'm going to save that, and that should sorry, I'm gonna make it the JPEG that we've been working on. It was a PNG, sorry. There you go. This guy. Replace it. So basically what we're doing is updating this file. Oh, there you go. So here we have an issue, but that's probably another thing we could work from here as well. No? So I went back to the layers, I turned off this, and I just added maybe another eraser here. So it's actually 100%, just for the sake of transitioning into the white again. Save. I'm gonna do the flatten image. Oops, maybe I can also do another thing, a layer of this. And in your case, it probably is a complete rendering, so you don't need to do that. It's a bit of faking it here so it connects with the whiteness again. And I'm gonna flatten this. Ctrl+Shift+S, make it a PNG, replace that one. Go back to Illustrator, and the link should hopefully update somehow. Oh, sorry, I forgot to say okay here. And now there it is. Select, update. There's transitioning nicely. I mean, potentially would make more sense to find more city here and not less, but because of the problem I had with it, it doesn't look so fantastic. So yeah, these type of operations actually are nice that you can work with. If it's too intense, you can work with transferences here as well. And it could be a mix of, again, line drawing and rendering, so you could add whatever techniques that you're thinking of in your project. You probably don't need this. I'll delete that one. How do we go about this? We just save the Illustrator file. We want to work with Illustrator, so you can call it the same, or you can say you know, final, new, or whatever it is. And this is the Illustrator file that you will be placing in your InDesign panel. Okay, so that's the thing. Keep on working on a mix of Photoshop post-production or rendering that you did in Rhino, and on Illustrator, the line thickness, the color, the quality, etc., etc. You can add people both in vector base, or you can add people in the Photoshop. Both combined is like a single world that are coming together here in whatever ways you want. You could combine this idea of vector line and rendering, but you could also have a rendering and the vectors together blending perfectly, so that in many ways you can go about it. And I just like to see what you're up to with this. Okay? So that's it.